Hi, everyone. My name is Marielle Papin, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Geography here at McGill University. And I'm your host today. So today's conversation aims to highlight how research and citizen action can inspire each other. So this recorded conversation is a collaboration between the Climate Reality Project Canada and McGill University. So today we have Dror Etzion from Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University, and Paula Bernardino, lead mentor for the Montreal area of the Climate Reality Project Canada. And they're going to discuss why it is important for companies to engage in sustainability initiatives and communicate them to their audiences. So Climate Reality Project Canada aims to mobilize citizens to gather data according to different indicators to pressure municipalities to work towards UN sustainability objectives. As for McGill University, it has over 200 faculty members from across 35 departments engaged in sustainability research, and over 100 McGill student group and clubs focused on sustainability, addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that the Climate Reality Project Canada's office and McGill University are located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We recognize and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we are hosting this discussion today. So I would like now to invite our first guest, Professor Ezion, Associate Professor at the Desautels Faculty of Management, to introduce himself and tell us how he got involved in the study of small and medium-sized enterprises and their sustainability initiatives.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been working on small and medium enterprises and climate action for a few years now through a project called Pivot. Pivot is a collaboration between McGill University and the National Film Board of Canada. And the project is oriented on really bringing small and medium enterprises throughout Canada to engage with climate action. We think that they're kind of neglected in the national discourse, in policy, in all kinds of settings. We don't really pay attention enough to small and medium enterprises and encouraging them to be a part of climate action. And this project is oriented to trying to build a community around that, understanding what motivates SMEs to engage with climate action, and then prompting and encouraging them to do meaningful things in order to help Canada achieve its net zero goals.
Okay, that's really interesting, but I'm wondering why do you think they're so neglected?
Well, I think for several reasons. I think policymakers typically focus a lot of their attention on big companies. The big companies that are famous that we all know, the big banks, the big industries. These are publicly traded corporations. You can count them, not on one hand, but you can. They're a manageable number, and you can engage with them. You can talk with a lot of the people in these organizations and discuss ways to develop policy that encourages these types of solutions towards climate action. There are all kinds of mechanisms that already exist. And it's just a smaller and more homogeneous group perhaps to work with. Small and medium enterprises are very diverse. There's more than 1 million of them in Canada. Some of them are really small, mom and pop businesses. Some of them are slightly bigger. They do specialized manufacturing, or they're in the food sector. And they're just so diverse and diffuse and different. And also each of them, when we think about it, they don't have that much impact. So your bang for the buck for each specific organization is not that much, and it's actually much more of a collective action problem. And so this just makes it much more difficult for policymakers to think about what would motivate them, what would encourage them, what types of procedures you can put in place in order to encourage that type of activity.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So, and now I would like to introduce Paula Bernardino, corporate social responsibility expert, senior strategist and associate research at the Credibility Institute, and also affiliated to McGill University as course lecturer in the public relations program of the School for Continuing Studies. So if you can say a few words about yourself and what you do.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Marielle, for this opportunity. Yes, so, as you mentioned a little bit of where I'm involved, so the Credibility Institute and also teaching at McGill's Public Relations program. And, just going back also to like how I ended up in sustainability and also the link with climate change, it goes back to a few years ago. I worked in the insurance industry for a couple of years. It is an industry that is highly impacted by climate change. And then from there, I started to look around and found Climate Reality Project. They had the training, I did the training. So I'm now a lead mentor for Montreal. So basically really like the purpose of Climate Reality is to empower people, citizens, to become more aware. Really like the mission is to educate people on climate change and what actions can be done. So we really focus on and encourage all the ambassadors, those who will go through the training, to act and do leadership acts. It could be just like writing blogs or doing presentations. And just going back also then to what Dror was saying regarding small businesses. So I've done some studies with the Credibility Institute, and two of them are very linked to where we are now with regards to corporate responsibility and sustainability. One that I did was on engaging employees with your corporate social responsibility programs. And there is a shift, I would say, from 10 years ago, where people now, applying for jobs will be looking for that information. They will be looking for, what is this organization, this company doing when it comes to social issues, when it comes to environmental issues, something that was not really in the mindset of people applying for jobs 10 years ago. So that's interesting from a human resources perspective when it comes to recruiting talent and retaining talent. And then I also looked at, how are companies communicating their sustainability initiatives and programs? Are they doing it well? Are they doing it authentically, responsibly? And what's interesting is what came out of it was small businesses felt, well, we're too small to focus and put efforts into a strategy of sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So that's a big opportunity I find for that sector.
Thank you very much for this response. And so, talking about conversation, I think it's time we start ours. So between the three of us. So I'd like to ask first, what motivates, in your opinion, Dror and Paula, what motivates companies to communicate with stakeholders about sustainability?
Maybe I'll start if that's okay, Paula. I think it's not one reason for every company. I think we have to avoid trying to simplify too much. I think if you're a large company, it's very clear that now it's almost an obligation to issue a sustainability report. I think I was just reading a few days ago that of large publicly traded corporations around the world, the brand names we're all familiar with from around the world, I think over 95% of them now publish sustainability reports. And even an oil company or all kinds of companies that you would think maybe don't have much to say or much to contribute, it might in other ways actually be blocking progress. Even they communicate around sustainability. So that's almost like a necessary thing to do if you're a larger company. And as Paula was saying, those smaller companies, they would probably have a different reason. You don't expect your dépanneur at the corner store or your gym to issue a sustainability report or to talk about it much. So in that case, I think it's mainly companies who really are thinking about their positioning. It's like, well, is this something that's interesting to my clients or my prospective clients? Or as Paula was saying, maybe it's something I could use to recruit and retain a good workforce. So there, I think it would be a bit more thoughtful because it is a lot of effort. They don't have all of these resources to put together a nice report or to communicate it well. But if that's the line of business you're in, if that's the type of industry you're in, it could be food, cosmetics, textiles. There's certain industries where there's really a need to try to reach those consumers, to reach those employees. And there you'll find actually really good communication. And sometimes not even that formal. It could just be, a very good social media feed. It could be different ways to reach different people. So that's the perspective that I see mainly in the small and medium enterprise sector.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. It's really showing, what goods are you doing, but then also having a reflection of, where else you can focus and improve and move forward when it comes to social and environmental issues.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying. Dror, you mentioned, there are so many different kinds of enterprises, companies, and you mentioned that as well, Paula, when you mentioned the insurance sector, which has been challenged a lot by sustainability issues. So how, as a researcher or as a decision maker or even as a consultant, how do you help these companies communicate better and improve their sustainability targets, I would say objectives, because of this diversity in terms of business sector, yeah, but also in terms of size.
Yeah, well, I can start. I like to, when I'm asked that question, say, well, first of all, what sector are you in? If you're in the service sector, it's a little bit easier in the sense that you can reflect on where can my services, be helpful somewhere in society. So for example, we're talking about the insurance industry. The insurance industry, when you look at the purpose as to why it was born, it was to protect people. And then it also has that, mission of educating people. So that's where you can build your sustainability initiatives around. If you're in the products sector, the reflection is a little bit different. The reflection is, okay, well, where can my products do harm for society, and what can I do to minimize those risks? So I think once you have that reflection, then it's much easier to help you define what the actions and next actions should be.
Yeah, I would add, I think what Paula is saying, and I'll introduce kind of the technical word for this, is materiality. So we talk a lot about materiality. And I think sometimes, you see companies, their communications are slick and they sound impressive. But if you think about it, kind of you scratch the surface a little bit, it's not entirely clear that really they're focusing on the main things. And so, an example I think that we can mention here is insurance companies, but also banks. So often you'll see in their communications that they're going to be net zero by a certain date in their operation. So that means for a bank, actually, it might not be that difficult, because if you think about what a bank is, it's essentially just a lot of buildings, right? So they could probably get powered by renewable energy and reduce their emissions quite significantly, and they would say, hey, we're net zero. But the material thing, the thing that banks really do, and Paula was saying, the thing that insurance companies really do, is they move money around to fund different types of projects. And if you think about the banks, especially in Canada, they might have these kind of nice net zero goals, but they're still funding a lot of fossil fuel projects. And so I think a good communication strategy for banks would be, hey, we're still doing these types of things. These are the reasons we're doing this, and maybe they're justified, but this is our exit ramp. This is where we're going. This is how we think the future will look. We're going to be part of creating the solutions that really move us off fossil fuels. And I think that communication would be received much better. It would be more meaningful. It would be more authentic. And of course, it would be more material, because the impacts through the money invested are much, much bigger than the direct impacts of the bank itself in its own little buildings and computers.
And that's a really good point Dror is making, because that's the problem is sometimes these companies don't know how to communicate, so then they avoid communicating it. And that's where the problem is, explain why you're investing in fossil fuels. There is a reason why, and you might be involved in a moment that you'll be able to convince and play a role in the decisions. But sometimes, these companies don't really know what arguments to use when it comes to communicating, so they omit it. So that's worse, because then, you'll have all these organizations that will be looking into it and say, hey, you forgot to mention this, right? So that's a problem is, I like to say you have to communicate authentically. You have to communicate your positives, your accomplishments, but also communicate, I wouldn't say your negatives, but I would say the challenges. And how are you overcoming them? So I think that's important.
That's great, thank you. And well, I'll start with Paula with my next question, but of course, Dror can add to it. So I was wondering, we talked about the diversity of companies, but there's also diversity of groups that companies target. So how do companies engage diverse groups, such as, well, of course, their employees, but also their customers and other businesses in their sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So let's look internally when it comes to employees. There's multiple ways, multiple programs that can be implemented internally. So, you have the regular donations, encouraging your employees to make donations. There's a matching donations from the company. There's encouraging your employees to volunteer for different charitable organizations, and then you can compensate by giving a donation to that organization, or really paying your employees to volunteer. But then there's also partnerships. I think companies, once they have a clear vision of where they want to go with their sustainability programs, and they have a clear mission, then look at where can you have partnerships. What organizations can you partner with, and that's where also once again you can include your employees, but then also include your customers, include your neighbors.
Dror, would you like to add anything on this?
Well, I think just to reiterate what Paula says, I mean, I think on a lot of the things that we talk about climate action in organizations, there's not one thing that all companies should do. I think we need to avoid as much as we can this type of cookie cutter thinking that all companies should act in the same way, because it really depends on what business you're in, where you're at, how much impact you have, where your impact is. Some companies, their impact is in their supply chain. Others, it's in the way consumers use their products later. Others they could have amazing philanthropic efforts. But it's really, I think, better if companies can pause for a moment. It's really hard to find the time, of course, when you're running a company. But if you don't pause and think about where is my impact, where is my opportunity to create change, what is the theory through which I'm going to create a better world and leave it for the next generations, or to partner with other companies, what is the real thing that I can do? And then kind of identify that one or two things that you're passionate about that you think can move the needle.
Last year with Corona and the pandemic, we saw some really good examples of companies who sat down and reflected and said, like, what can I do? Simple actions to help my customers, to help my employees. I'm taking banks who lowered the interest rates. I'm taking an insurance company that took away the premiums for car insurance and said, well, you're not driving, so you don't have to pay them. Companies, who pivoted and they started doing PP, those kind of initiatives. It was simple, but it ended up helping, the employees. It ended up helping the customers.
Interesting. And that makes me wonder, because we see companies with different interests and that can do many different things. So what do you think are the challenges of mobilizing companies to undertake sustainability initiatives?
Companies like to see what others are doing, and they are afraid to sometimes jump ahead and to be a bit more aggressive or progressive. I don't know what the word would be on this. And it's very easy to kind of, look around and see best practices and try to emulate those and kind of fit into the herd. But I think there's this saying, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And I think there's just a little bit of fear of being, trying to do something that hasn't been tried before, or that kind of, maybe you're wearing your heart on your sleeve too much, or kind of acting your values a bit too much. What is the proper lane for business in society? What should businesses do? And I think some of these fears might not be as founded as people think. They might just be fears of not very substantial ones. And companies can experiment. I think one of the things that I always teach in my classes is that this is a big problem, and there is no silver bullet, and we have to try all kinds of things. And I encourage companies to experiment and try something. Maybe that will you'll discover that this is effective. Maybe you'll discover that your customers like it. Maybe you'll discover that it really increases employee motivation. Maybe you'll discover all kinds of interesting. Maybe you'll discover that you're feeling fulfilled at work, which is a great feeling, to come to work and to do something. I think nobody comes to work and wants to damage the environment or to kill polar bears. That's not on anybody's agenda. It might sound a bit utopian, but I think a lot of businesses can have, if they have that moment to pause and to think a little bit and to figure out how their business aligns with a better world, they'll probably find something that they could latch onto and that would be actually encouraging for them to do.
Yeah, that's good. And also what I find is sometimes they'll feel overwhelmed, especially if they're starting from scratch. They don't know where to start. One point that I like to tell, companies in that situation is go look at the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's a great resource to start. Look at the 17 goals and then have a reflection of which ones make sense for you. It's so easy. They have all the targets. So then start building a little bit of, what would be your strategy and your initiatives based on the SDGs. So you'll feel much less overwhelmed. And you'll feel, okay, well, I don't have to start from scratch. I can find a little bit of where I can fit in here.
That's fascinating. And we talked about the challenges, and now I'd like to change a little bit the perspective and look at the opportunities. So what do you think are the opportunities that companies should seize to move forward with their sustainability initiatives? I don't know if Paula, you want to start maybe?
Yes, I find, take advantage of the momentum when it comes to awareness. People are much more awareness when it comes to the environment. If you are in an industry where you can play a role at minimizing the impacts on the environment, people are interested. People want to see actions when it comes to climate change, what companies are doing. So I think that's a great opportunity when it comes to social issues. Also, people are now more aware. The message has been amplifying. Bottom line is it has to feel authentic. So if it makes sense for your company to be playing in the environmental space or in a social issue space, then go for it. Make partnerships with those organizations, also helping in that space, as long as it's authentic. So as long as there's alignment and a link to what your organization is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, when I talk to students, and we talked about this, about people in their 20s and 30s entering or kind of starting in their workforce, I think this is going to be the defining issue of their careers. I think it's, every summer, basically the writing on the wall becomes clearer that this is changing our world dramatically, that it's impacting each and every one of us wherever we live and what types of industries we have, through the flooding and the fires and the food shortages and the climate migration. And it's going to get more and more apparent and impactful every year. And there is literally no way that the world won't have to adapt and switch gears and shift pretty substantially. This includes the world of business. And so if you're in your 20s or 30s, this is the mega trend that is going to be at the background or sometimes in the foreground of your career over the next few decades. And so in that regard, you asked about opportunities, but we could almost think about it as almost mandatory. If you're not going to shift, if you're not going to adapt, you're not going to have room really in the economy of the future. There are some things that we do now that are not going to be happening in the same way in 10 or 20 years, from the way we move ourselves around, or the way we heat our buildings, or the way we ship our goods. All of those things are going to change, and all of those are tremendous opportunities. How can we move things in a better way? How can we heat our houses in a better way? How can we, all of these things are not just technological things, but also business model things. And it's just, I look at it, and if I'm an entrepreneur, I just think there's so much opportunity. There's so many niches, there's so many things, so many solutions that we need to devise, that I think it's profoundly exciting. And if I was an entrepreneur, I would be focusing all my attention on finding a topic that I'm passionate about and that could kind of orient and steer my career over the next few decades.
And to kind of bounce back on what Paula said, but also what Dror mentioned, there's this idea of, if it makes sense to you and to your company, but there's also this challenge and something, a sort of urgent crisis that we need to address, and compulsory actions are necessary. So what do you do if it doesn't really make sense to you as a company to do something? I know it's a little bit of a controversial question, but what do you do? Just do nothing? Do you need to be obliged to do something?
I think the pressure is there. Companies do have to do something. If the pressure is not coming from their customers, it's coming from their employees. So, this is a time where companies do have to have that reflection of, where can I play a role and make, change and have an impact in this big crisis that we're going through. Yeah.
What do you think, Dror?
Well, I think maybe in the short term, things could kind of move along. But, in the business world, we always think about what is the next disruption, what is the next jolt, what is the next big change that's going to happen. And if you can predict that and actually, move towards that goal even before it becomes apparent to your competitors, you're in a much better position to succeed.
Thank you. That's fascinating. So before we finish our discussion, is there anything important that you want to add regarding the things we've already said, or other ideas related to our topic today?
Well, I would like to. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Paula.
No, go ahead.
But I would like to just mention the URL of the project that we're running with the National Film Board of Canada. So it's www.gopivot.com. What we do there is we collect stories of Canadian SMEs who are taking climate action. It's in French and in English. It covers all the provinces, not yet all the territories. And it's a growing set of, we think, motivating and inspiring stories. And we feel that it's profoundly empowering to recognize that you're part of a community. that you're not the only one, that others like you in your industry, in your city, in your province are doing meaningful things around climate action. So we're collecting these stories. We're adding to these stories. If you're listening to this podcast and you think you have a great story to share, get in touch with us. We'd love to profile you on the platform.
Yes, and then on my end, if anybody is listening to this podcast and is interested in environmental issues, climate change, I do invite you to go and look at the Climate Reality Project. If you want to become an ambassador, we have multiple trainings throughout the year. They're now online due to the pandemic, so much more accessible also. But then also, if you want to hear more, just request a presentation from any of our ambassadors. So, our presentations are always about the three key questions. Must we change? Can we change? And will we change? So, that's where we focus our attention. So very accessible, just, find us and then we can make that happen.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Dror and Paula. It's been great to have you here and engage in this really fascinating discussion.
Well, thank you, Marielle, and great talking to you, Dror.
Same here, Paula. Thanks.
So thank you, Professor Ezion and Paula Bernardino. I hope all listeners enjoyed learning more about corporate sustainability initiatives and communication strategies. To find out more about the sustainability indicators and how to engage with your municipality on sustainability issues, go to climatereality.ca/NCL. And for more news about what McGill researchers and students are doing on the sustainability front, visit mcgill.ca/MSSI and mcgill.ca/sustainability.